The gunshot that ended Quinlan Wright's brother shattered more than just the silence of a Saturday afternoon in Alamosa, Colorado. It shattered the last piece of his heart that still knew how to feel anything beyond emptiness. Now, 3 years later in the autumn of 1882, Quinlan sat at his small wooden table in the cabin he had built with his own calloused hands, staring at the single tin plate before him as the sun disappeared behind the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. The beans had gone cold again. He barely noticed anymore. The ranch he worked sprawled across the valley floor, cattle dotting the landscape like brown stones scattered by some giant hand. Quinlan had earned his reputation as one of the most reliable cowboys in the San Luis Valley, the kind of man who could rope a steer in under 10 seconds and ride for 16 hours straight without complaint. The ranch owner, Mr. Hutchins, paid him fair wages and left him alone, which was exactly what Quinlan wanted. Solitude had become his closest companion, a heavy blanket he wrapped around himself each night to keep out the cold reality that he was 26 years old and had forgotten how to live. His brother Thomas had been younger by 2 years, full of laughter and dreams about buying their own spread someday. They were going to raise horses, Thomas had said, the finest horses in Colorado. But Thomas had made the mistake of being in the Silver Spur Saloon when Jake Morrill came looking for a fight, and being a Wright meant you did not back down even when you should. Quinlan had been out checking fence lines when it happened. By the time he rode back into town, his brother was already in the ground. He should have been there. That thought circled his mind like a vulture every single day. Quinlan pushed the beans around his plate with a bent fork, not really seeing them. The cabin felt too quiet, the kind of silence that pressed against your ears until you wanted to shout just to break it. He had thought about getting a dog once, but even that felt like too much connection, too much risk of caring about something that could be taken away. The knock on his door came so unexpectedly that he actually jumped, his hand instinctively moving toward the revolver on his hip. Nobody came out here. The cabin sat a good 2 miles from the main ranch house, tucked into a grove of cottonwoods near a creek. He had chosen this spot specifically because it was away from everyone and everything. "Hello." The voice was female, slightly breathless, and tinged with something Quinlan recognized as desperation. "Please, I know someone is in there. I saw your lamp." He stood slowly, every instinct telling him to stay silent and wait for whoever it was to leave. But something in that voice, some quality he could not quite name, made him walk to the door. When he opened it, he found himself looking at a young woman with dark hair falling loose from what had probably started the day as a neat bun. Her dress was covered in trail dust, and she was leading a limping horse. "I am sorry to disturb you," she said quickly, her green eyes meeting his with an intensity that made him want to look away. "My horse threw a shoe about a mile back. I was trying to make it to town before dark, but I do not think he can go any farther. I saw your light and thought perhaps you might help." Quinlan studied her for a long moment. She was probably around his age, maybe a year or two younger, with a face that would have been pretty if it were not so tight with worry. Her dress marked her as respectable, not a saloon girl or anything like that. Everything about her screamed trouble in the way that needing things always meant trouble. "Town 6 miles, he finally said, his voice rough from disuse. "Horse will not make it, I know." She glanced back at the animal, genuine concern in her expression. "I would not ask if I were not desperate. I have money. I can pay you for your trouble. Do not want your money." The words came out harder than he intended. He sighed, running a hand through hair that needed cutting. "Got some tools. I will take a look." Relief flooded her face so completely that Quinlan felt something twist uncomfortably in his chest. He ignored it, focusing instead on the practical matter at hand. He took the reins from her and led the horse toward the small lean-to that served as his stable. His own gelding, a steady bay named Rusty, watched with mild interest from his stall. The woman followed, maintaining a respectful distance. "My name is Helena Garrett," she offered. "I am a schoolteacher, or I will be once I actually make it to Alamosa. I was supposed to arrive 2 days ago, but the stage broke an axle in Antonito, and I had to wait for repairs. Then I thought I could make better time on horseback, but clearly that was a mistake." Quinlan grunted in response, examining the horse's hoof. The shoe was not just loose, it was gone completely, probably lying somewhere along the road she had traveled. The hoof itself looked all right, no cracks or serious damage, but the animal would need a new shoe before it could carry her anywhere. "I do not have a forge," he said, straightening. "Can trim the hoof and wrap it, but you will not be riding to town tonight. Horse needs proper shoeing, and that means waiting until morning when I can take you both to the blacksmith." Helena's shoulders sagged. "I see. Is there perhaps somewhere in town I could stay, an inn or boarding house?" "Town 6 miles, Quinlan repeated. "On foot in the dark, that is a good way to break an ankle or run into something worse." He did not elaborate on what worse might entail, but they both knew the San Luis Valley was not without its dangers after sunset. "You can sleep in the cabin." "I will take the stable." "No, I could not possibly, lady. It is the only option unless you want to start walking and hope you make it." He turned away, already uncomfortable with how many words he had spoken. "I will get your horse settled. You go inside, warm yourself by the fire." Helena hesitated, and Quinlan could practically feel her weighing her options. A strange man's cabin versus the dark wilderness. Finally, she nodded. "Thank you, Mr. I am sorry, I did not catch your name." "Quinlan Wright." He did not offer anything more. She seemed to sense that further conversation would not be welcome, so she simply nodded again and walked back toward the cabin. Quinlan busied himself with the horse, taking his time to clean and wrap the hoof properly. The animal was a decent gelding, well cared for despite the current predicament. As he worked, he tried not to think about the fact that there was a woman in his cabin, probably looking at his sparse furnishings and wondering what kind of man lived like this. A man who had given up, that was what kind. When he finally returned to the cabin, carrying his bedroll and expecting to grab a few supplies before retreating to the stable, he stopped short in the doorway. Helena had not just warmed herself by the fire, she had stoked it properly, adding wood from his stack, and she was standing at his small table, which now held 2 tin plates instead of 1. "I hope you do not mind," she said, not quite meeting his eyes. "You were eating when I interrupted, and I have some dried meat and biscuits in my saddlebag. It seemed only right to share, considering your kindness." Quinlan stared at those 2 plates. Something about them made his throat tight, made it hard to breathe. When was the last time he had sat down to a meal with another person? When was the last time his table had been set for more than one? "You do not have to stay," Helena said quickly, misreading his silence. "I just thought I am sorry if I overstepped." "No." The word came out too loud, and he forced himself to speak more quietly. "No, it is fine. I just was not expecting it." She smiled then, a small tentative thing that somehow made the cabin feel less empty. "Well, the food will not be anything special, but it will be warm at least. Please sit." He almost refused. Every part of him wanted to take his bedroll and retreat to the safety of solitude. But something stopped him, maybe the way she had set those 2 plates with such simple matter-of-factness. Or maybe just the fact that his beans had gone cold and he was tired of being alone, even if he would never admit it out loud. Quinlan sat. They ate in silence at first, the kind of awkward quiet that falls between strangers forced into proximity. But Helena seemed determined not to let it remain that way. She talked about her journey from Boston, about how different Colorado was from everything she had known, about her nervousness at starting her first real teaching position. She did not seem to expect much response from him, which was good because he did not have much to offer. But he listened. And somewhere between her story about a woman on the stage who had traveled with 3 chickens in a crate and her admission that she had never actually ridden a horse before last week, Quinlan felt something inside him shift. Not much. Just a tiny crack in the wall he had built around himself. "What about you?" Helena asked finally, her green eyes curious but not pushy. "Have you lived in a Lamosa long, 3 years?" He took a drink of water from his cup. "Work at the Hutchins Ranch. Do you like it? The work, I mean." Quinlan considered the question. Did he like it? He had never really thought about it in those terms. "Keeps me busy." She seemed to understand what he was not saying because she did not push further. Instead, she started talking about her plans for the school, how she wanted to make sure even the ranch children who lived far out got a proper education. Her enthusiasm was almost foreign to him, this idea that someone could care so deeply about something that did not directly involve their own survival. When the meal ended and Quinlan stood to gather his bedroll, Helena stopped him with a hand on his arm. The touch was brief, barely a second, but it burned. "Thank you," she said simply. "Not just for helping with my horse, but for this, for sharing your table. I have been on the road for so long, eating alone in strange places. It was nice to have company." Quinlan nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He left the cabin and made his way to the stable, where he spread his bedroll in an empty stall. Rusty watched him with what he could have sworn was amusement. "Not a word," Quinlan muttered to the horse. He lay awake for a long time, staring at the rough wooden beams above him. He kept thinking about those 2 plates, about the way the cabin had felt different with someone else in it. About how Helena had smiled when she talked about teaching children to read, like it was the most important thing in the world. He thought about Thomas, who would have liked her immediately and probably would have talked her ear off within 5 minutes of meeting her. Thomas, who had always said Quinlan was too serious, too closed off, that he needed to let people in before he forgot how. Maybe Thomas had been right. Morning came cold and clear, frost glittering on the grass. Quinlan was up before dawn out of habit, tending to the horses and trying not to think too hard about the fact that he would soon be alone again. When he approached the cabin, he found Helena already awake, her hair neatly pinned and her dress as tidy as trail dust would allow. "Good morning," she said with a cheerfulness that should have been annoying but somehow was not. "I was not sure what to do about breakfast. I did not want to presume. We will eat in town," Quinlan interrupted. "Need to get your horse to the blacksmith soon as possible." "You can ride with me on Rusty." A flash of nervousness crossed her face. "I am not very good at riding. You will be sitting behind me. Just hold on and Rusty will do the rest." The ride into a Lamosa took about 45 minutes, with Helena's arms wrapped around his waist and her body pressed against his back. It was the most prolonged physical contact Quinlan had experienced in 3 years, and he spent the entire ride trying to focus on anything else: the morning birds, the changing leaves, the way the mountains looked in the early light. Anything but the warmth of her and the way she smelled like lavender despite the trail dust. The town was coming to life when they arrived, shopkeepers opening their doors and early risers heading to breakfast. Quinlan led Helena's horse to the blacksmith first, a gruff man named Porter who grunted his agreement to have the animal shoed within 2 hours. "Now what?" Helena asked as they stood in the street, morning sun warming the chill away. "Now we eat." Quinlan surprised himself with the words. He could have easily left her here, gone about his own business, but he did not. Instead, he led her to a small restaurant run by a Mexican woman named Señora Mendoza, who made the best huevos rancheros in the valley. Over breakfast, Helena told him more about herself. She had left Boston after her father died, her mother having passed when she was young. Teaching had always been her dream, and when she saw the advertisement for a position in Colorado, she had sold almost everything she owned to make the journey west. "Were you not scared?" Quinlan asked, the question surprising him as much as it seemed to surprise her. Coming all this way alone to a place you had never seen, Helena considered this, her fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Terrified," she admitted. "But I was more scared of staying, of living a small, safe life and never knowing what I might have been capable of." Does that make sense? It did, more than she probably knew. Quinlan had chosen the opposite path. He had picked safety and solitude, had built a life so small and contained that nothing could hurt him because nothing could reach him. And until last night, he had thought that was enough. They talked through breakfast, the conversation coming easier now. Quinlan found himself telling her about the ranch, about the cattle drives and the way the valley changed with the seasons. He did not talk about Thomas, not directly, but when she asked if he had any family, the brief shadow that crossed his face must have told her everything she needed to know. "I am sorry," she said softly. "I did not mean to pry." "You did not." He met her eyes, those green eyes that seemed to see too much. "Had a brother. Lost him 3 years ago." Helena reached across the table and touched his hand just for a moment. "That must be very hard." It was, but somehow saying it out loud to her made it feel slightly less crushing. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Quinlan cleared his throat. "The boarding house is on Main Street. Mrs. Patterson runs it. She is fair, keeps a clean place. You should be able to get a room there until you figure out your living situation." "Will you show me?" Helena asked, and there was something in her voice, some hope that he could not quite identify. "Sure." They picked up Helena's horse after it was shoed, and Quinlan walked with her through town, pointing out the general store, the church, the school where she would be teaching. It was a small building, whitewashed and neat, with a bell tower that gleamed in the sun. Helena's face lit up when she saw it. "It is perfect," she breathed. "Absolutely perfect." Quinlan felt something warm in his chest watching her excitement. When they reached the boarding house, he helped her secure a room with Mrs. Patterson, a widow in her 50s who seemed delighted to have a schoolteacher as a tenant. As they stood on the porch, Helena turned to him with a smile. "Thank you for everything, Quinlan. I do not know what I would have done without your help." He should have said goodbye then. Should have tipped his hat, wished her well, and ridden back to his cabin and his solitude. Instead, he heard himself say, "If you need anything, getting settled and such, you can send word out to the ranch. Someone will find me." Her smile widened. "I will remember that." Over the next few weeks, Quinlan found excuses to come into town more often than was strictly necessary. He told himself it was because he needed supplies, or because Mr. Hutchins had business that required his presence, or because Rusty needed new shoes. But the truth was that he wanted to see Helena. She had settled into her position with a determination that was admirable. The school had been in rough shape after the previous teacher left, and Helena spent long hours cleaning, organizing, and preparing lessons. Quinlan found himself helping without quite knowing how it happened. He repaired the broken steps leading to the schoolhouse door. He fixed a window that would not open. He even helped her move a heavy cabinet that had been blocking half the room. They fell into a pattern. Quinlan would show up with some excuse, Helena would put him to work, and afterward they would talk. Sometimes they had coffee at the small cafe across from the school. Sometimes they just sat on the steps and watched the town go by. Helena told him about her students, about the little girl who was brilliant at arithmetic, and the boy who could barely sit still long enough to learn his letters. Quinlan found himself telling her stories about the ranch, about difficult calves and ornery steers, and the time a mountain lion wandered too close to the herd. He started eating dinner at the boarding house occasionally, Mrs. Patterson allowing tenants to take meals together in the dining room for an extra fee. Helena always saved him a seat, and Quinlan began to look forward to those evenings more than he wanted to admit. There was something about sitting across from her, watching her animated face as she talked about her day, that made the world feel less heavy. One evening in late October, after most of the other boarders had gone to bed, Helena walked with him out to where he had tied Rusty. The night was cold, stars brilliant overhead, and her breath came in small white clouds. "Can I ask you something?" she said, her voice quiet. "Sure." "Why do you eat alone? Out at your cabin, I mean. The ranch has a cookhouse, does it not? You could take your meals there." Quinlan looked up at the stars, considering how much to tell her. "After my brother died, being around people felt wrong, like I did not deserve to laugh or enjoy anything because he was gone. Easier to just be by myself. And now it is a habit, I guess." He met her eyes. "Or it was until you showed up and set 2 plates on my table." Helena smiled, but there was something sad in it. "You know it was not your fault, do not you, whatever happened to your brother?" "I was not there." The words came out harsh. "I should have been there." "You cannot protect everyone all the time, Quinlan. Sometimes bad things happen, and it is not anyone's fault. It is just life." He wanted to argue, to hold onto the guilt that had been his constant companion for 3 years. But looking at Helena, at the genuine care in her expression, he felt that guilt loosen its grip just slightly. "How did you get so wise? I am a teacher. We are supposed to know everything." Her smile turned teasing. "Plus, I read a lot of books." Quinlan laughed, actually laughed, and the sound surprised him. When was the last time he had laughed? Helena's face lit up at the sound, and suddenly the space between them felt charged with something he had not felt in so long he barely recognized it. "I should go," he said, though he did not move. "Yes," Helena agreed, also not moving. They stood there for a long moment, close enough that he could see the exact pattern of green in her eyes. Then Quinlan did something terrifying and wonderful. He reached out and tucked a loose strand of her hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "Good night, Helena." "Good night, Quinlan." He rode back to his cabin that night feeling like something fundamental had shifted. The loneliness that had been his armor for 3 years was cracking, and Helena was the reason. It scared him and exhilarated him in equal measure. The next time he came into town, he brought her fresh eggs from the ranch chickens. She laughed and made them breakfast in the boarding house kitchen, and they ate together at the small table in her room with the door properly open for respectability. The 2 plates between them felt right in a way Quinlan had almost forgotten existed. As autumn deepened into winter, Quinlan found himself spending more and more time with Helena. They took walks after school, their shoulders occasionally brushing as they navigated the wooden sidewalks. They attended church together on Sundays, sitting in the same pew like it was the most natural thing in the world. The town began to notice, of course. Small places always did. But the talk was mostly positive. People liked Helena, and they were happy to see Quinlan coming back to life. One December evening, as snow began to fall soft and steady, Quinlan took Helena to dinner at the nicest restaurant in Alamosa. It was not fancy by Boston standards, probably, but it was the best he could offer. Over steak and potatoes, he told her more about Thomas, about how much his brother would have liked her. Helena listened with tears in her eyes, holding his hand across the table. "He sounds like he was wonderful," she said. "He was." Quinlan squeezed her hand. "You would have made him laugh." "He always said I needed someone to make me laugh." "Is that what I do?" Helena asked, her eyes dancing despite the serious conversation. "Among other things." Quinlan took a breath, knowing he was about to step off a cliff into unknown territory. "Helena, I have not been good at this, at letting anyone close, but you have changed something in me. When you set those 2 plates that first night, it was like you were telling me I did not have to be alone anymore. I do not want to be alone anymore." "You do not have to be," she said simply. "I care about you, more than I thought I was capable of caring about anyone." Helena's smile was radiant. "I care about you too, Quinlan. I think I have since that first night when you were so gruff and uncomfortable but helped me anyway." "I was not that gruff." "You absolutely were." She laughed. "But I liked it. I liked that you were real, not trying to impress me with pretty words. You just helped because it was the right thing to do." They left the restaurant and walked through the falling snow, and when they reached the boarding house, Quinlan pulled Helena into his arms and kissed her. She kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands clutching his coat. And for the first time since Thomas died, Quinlan felt whole. Winter passed in a blur of stolen moments and growing love. Quinlan officially started courting Helena, which meant proper calls at the boarding house and chaperoned activities that made them both feel like teenagers. But he did not mind. Every moment with her was precious, a gift he had not expected to receive. In February, during a particularly cold week when the school had to close, because the stove could not keep the room warm enough, Helena came down with a fever. Quinlan heard about it from Mrs. Patterson when he came into town for his usual visit. He immediately went to the boarding house, where the landlady was worried but trying to stay calm. "She has been asking for you," Mrs. Patterson admitted. "I probably should not let you see her, propriety and all, but you are the only person who seems to settle her." Quinlan took the stairs 2 at a time. Helena's room was dim, curtains drawn against the weak winter light. She lay in bed, flushed with fever, her hair damp with sweat. When she saw him, she smiled weakly. "You came. Of course I came." He sat on the edge of the bed, touching her forehead. She was burning up. "How long have you been like this?" 2 days. "It is not serious, just a fever." But it was serious enough that Quinlan did not leave her side for the next 3 days. He ignored propriety and Mrs. Patterson's half-hearted protests, sleeping in the chair beside Helena's bed and helping her drink water and broth. He changed the cool cloths on her forehead and read to her from the books on her shelf. Somewhere in those long hours, as he cared for her with gentle determination, he realized he loved her, not just cared for her, but truly deeply loved her in a way that terrified and thrilled him. When the fever finally broke on the 3rd night, Helena woke to find him asleep in the chair, his hand still holding hers. She squeezed his fingers and he woke immediately. "How do you feel?" he asked, his voice rough. "Better. Thanks to you." She studied his face, seeing the exhaustion there. "You stayed. Where else would I be?" Helena's eyes filled with tears. "You are a good man, Quinlan Wright, the best man I have ever known." "I love you," he said, the words coming easily now. "I did not think I would ever feel this way again, but I love you, Helena." "I love you too," she whispered. He kissed her then, gentle and careful because she was still weak. But it was a kiss full of promise, full of the future they could build together. When spring arrived, Quinlan asked Helena to marry him. He did it properly, going down on one knee in the schoolyard after all her students had gone home. She said yes before he even finished asking the question, throwing her arms around his neck and laughing through her tears. They were married in June of 1883 in the small church in Alamosa, with what felt like the entire town in attendance. Mr. Hutchins gave Quinlan the day off and a bonus as a wedding gift. Mrs. Patterson cried through the entire ceremony. And when Quinlan kissed his bride, he felt Thomas's presence like a blessing, like his brother was finally at peace knowing Quinlan had found happiness again. They spent their wedding night at the cabin, which Helena had helped transform over the past months from a sparse, lonely place into a real home. She had added curtains to the windows and rugs to the floor. She had planted flowers outside the door and filled the shelves with books. And that first night as husband and wife, they sat at the wooden table together, 2 plates side by side, and Quinlan looked at his wife and knew he was the luckiest man alive. "Thank you," he said softly. Helena looked up from her meal. "For what?" "For seeing me. For not letting me stay lost in my grief. For setting 2 plates that first night and showing me I did not have to be alone." She reached across and took his hand. "You were never meant to be alone, Quinlan. You just needed someone to remind you." Life settled into a beautiful rhythm. Helena continued teaching, and Quinlan continued working the ranch. Mr. Hutchins, pleased to see his best cowboy so happy, offered to sell Quinlan a small piece of land adjacent to the main ranch, 5 acres with good water and decent grazing. It was not the horse ranch Thomas had dreamed of, but it was a start. Quinlan and Helena bought it with their combined savings, making plans for the future. In the evenings, Quinlan would come home to find Helena already there, the cabin warm and welcoming. They would eat dinner together, those 2 plates a symbol of everything they had built. Sometimes they talked about their days. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence. But always, Quinlan felt grateful. Helena got pregnant in the fall of their first year of marriage. The baby came the following June. A healthy boy they named Thomas after the brother who had died but whose memory had finally become something beautiful rather than something that hurt. Little Thomas had his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes, and Quinlan loved him with a fierceness that sometimes frightened him. "It is all right to be scared," Helena told him one night as he held their sleeping son. "Love is scary because it means you have something to lose. But it is also what makes life worth living." Quinlan kissed her forehead. "When did you become so wise?" "I told you, I read a lot of books." 2 years later, they had a daughter they named Rose, and their small cabin burst at the seams with noise and love and chaos. Quinlan built an addition to give the children their own room. He also started training young horses on their 5 acres, just a few at a time, building the reputation that would eventually allow him to quit working for Mr. Hutchins and focus full-time on his own growing business. Helena eventually stopped teaching to focus on their growing family, though she never lost her love of education. She taught their children at home until they were old enough for school, making sure they could read and write and think critically about the world around them. And sometimes, on quiet evenings after the children were asleep, she would tell Quinlan about her dreams of maybe starting a library in Alamosa, a place where everyone could access books regardless of their circumstances. "Then do it," Quinlan said. "You have always been good at making dreams into reality." So she did. Over the next few years, Helena organized fundraisers and wrote letters and slowly gathered enough books and money to open a small library in a room above the general store. It was not much, but it was something. And watching her passion and determination reminded Quinlan every day why he had fallen in love with her. Their lives were not without challenges. There were hard winters and failed crops and times when money was tight. There were childhood illnesses that had them pacing the floor all night, and disagreements that required patience and compromise. But through it all, they had each other. They had those 2 plates at their table, a daily reminder that they were not alone, that they had chosen each other and would keep choosing each other no matter what came. In the summer of 1889, on a warm evening with the windows open and the smell of honeysuckle drifting through the air, Quinlan sat at their table, expanded now to accommodate a growing family, and looked around at his life. Thomas, now 5, was chattering about a frog he had caught that day. Rose, 3, was trying to get her brother's attention by throwing bits of bread at him. Helena was telling them both to settle down, but her eyes were sparkling with amusement. "Papa, can we keep the frog?" Thomas asked, his face so earnest that Quinlan had to hide his smile. "Frogs belong outside, son, but we can visit him tomorrow if you want." "I want to visit the frog," Rose announced. "Me first?" Thomas shot back. "You can both go," Helena interjected before a full argument could develop. "Together. That is what family does, we do things together." Quinlan caught his wife's eye and smiled. Together. That word had meant nothing to him 7 years ago when he ate alone in this cabin every night, drowning in grief and isolation. But Helena had changed everything. She had seen a broken, lonely cowboy and decided he was worth saving. She had set 2 plates on his table and showed him that life was not meant to be survived but lived, fully and joyfully, with someone by your side. After dinner, after the children were tucked into bed with stories and kisses, Quinlan and Helena sat on the porch together watching the stars emerge. He had his arm around her and she leaned against him with comfortable familiarity. "You ever think about that night I showed up with my limping horse?" Helena asked. "All the time." Quinlan pressed a kiss to her hair. "Best accident that ever happened." "Not an accident," Helena said firmly. "Fate. I was meant to find you that night. We were meant to find each other." "You think so? I know so." She tilted her face up to look at him. "You saved me that night, giving me shelter, but Quinlan, you have to know you saved me in bigger ways too. I was running away from a lonely life in Boston, but I did not really know what I was running toward. Then I found you, and suddenly everything made sense." "You are the one who did the saving," Quinlan argued gently. "I was barely living before you came along, just existing day after day. You taught me how to feel again. Then we saved each other," Helena decided. "That seems fair." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the crickets and the distant sound of cattle lowing. Quinlan thought about the man he had been, the lonely cowboy who ate dinner alone every night, who had built walls so high nothing could get through. That man seemed like a stranger now, someone from another lifetime. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For being stubborn enough to knock on my door that night, for not giving up on me even when I was difficult, for showing me that 2 plates are always better than 1. Helena laughed softly. "Well, now we have 4 plates most nights, soon to be 5 when this little one arrives." She placed his hand on her stomach where their 3rd child was growing. Quinlan felt his heart expand with joy. "Another one, are you sure?" "Very sure. I was going to tell you at dinner, but the children were so rowdy I could not get a word in." She grinned at him. "Surprised?" "Best kind of surprised." He kissed her properly then, pouring everything he felt into it. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Helena Wright, more than I ever thought it was possible to love someone." "I love you too, Quinlan. Every stubborn, wonderful part of you." They stayed on the porch until the night grew cold, then went inside to their warm home full of love and life and possibility. As Quinlan banked the fire for the night, he glanced at the table where tomorrow's breakfast plates would be set. 4 plates now, soon to be 5. A table that had once held only 1 plate for a lonely man who had forgotten how to hope. Helena had given him back his hope. She had given him back his life. And every single day, he would be grateful for the twist of fate that brought a schoolteacher with a limping horse to his door on an autumn evening 7 years ago. Their third child arrived in February of 1890, another boy they named James. He was a difficult baby, colicky and fussy, but Quinlan and Helena faced the sleepless nights together, taking turns walking the floor and singing lullabies. Those early months were exhausting, but there was beauty in the exhaustion, the beauty of being needed, of being part of something larger than yourself. As James grew from infant to toddler, their little house became even more chaotic. Thomas was now 7 and starting to show real talent with horses, following his father around whenever he could. Rose at 5 was already reading above her level, her mother's daughter through and through. And James was into everything, a whirlwind of curiosity and mischief. Quinlan's horse training business continued to grow. Word had spread about his skill and patience, and ranchers from all over the San Luis Valley brought him their young horses to break and train. It was hard work but satisfying, and it paid well enough that they were able to expand their property, buying an additional 10 acres when the neighboring homesteader decided to move back east. Helena's library also thrived. What had started as a single room was now a proper building, donated by a wealthy Denver businessman who had been impressed by her determination. The Garrett Library, named for Helena, despite her protests, became the heart of Alamosa's growing cultural life. Helena ran reading groups and organized lectures, turning the library into a gathering place for anyone who wanted to learn and grow. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Quinlan took Helena back to the cabin where they had first met. Mr. Hutchins had allowed the property to fall into disrepair after Quinlan moved out, but Quinlan had purchased it the year before with the idea of restoring it. He wanted his children to see where their parents' story had begun. As they walked through the dusty rooms, Helena touched the old table where they had shared that first meal with 2 plates. "It is smaller than I remembered," she said softly. "Everything was smaller then," Quinlan replied. "My whole world was small, just this cabin and my grief and my loneliness." "You made my world bigger." "We made each other's worlds bigger," Helena corrected, as she always did. She turned to face him, her face more beautiful to him at 33 than it had been at 25. Life had added tiny lines around her eyes and a few strands of silver in her dark hair, but to Quinlan she was perfect. "What do you want to do with this place?" "I thought maybe we could fix it up, use it as a guest house or a place for the children when they get older and need space. But honestly, I just wanted to own it, wanted to make sure it was taken care of because it matters. This cabin is where I learned to live again." Helena's eyes filled with tears, happy tears, the kind she cried when she was moved by something beautiful. "You are a sentimental man, Quinlan Wright. I love that about you. Only because you taught me how to be." They spent the afternoon cleaning the cabin, talking about all the memories held within its walls. Quinlan told her things he had never shared before about the darkest days after Thomas died, about how close he had come to just giving up entirely. Helena listened and held him, her presence a reminder that those dark days were past. As the sun began to set, they sat on the porch step together, watching the light turn golden across the valley. "Do you ever miss it?" Helena asked. "The solitude, I mean. Sometimes I worry that I barged into your life and turned everything upside down." Quinlan turned to look at her, making sure she could see the truth in his eyes. "You did turn everything upside down, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me. I do not miss the solitude, Helena. I do not miss eating alone or sleeping alone or keeping the world at arm's length. You showed me what life could be, and I would not trade a single moment of the beautiful chaos we have built together. Even when all 3 children are crying at the same time, even then." He kissed her temple. "Especially then, because it means we are alive and together and building something that matters. You and our children, you are everything." They returned home as the stars came out, back to their larger house, where Mrs. Patterson was watching the children. The older woman had become like a grandmother to their family, a beloved fixture in their lives. When she left, Quinlan tucked the children into bed while Helena prepared tea for the two of them. Later, as they sat together by the fire, Helena pulled out a letter. "This came today while you were at the cabin. It is from my cousin in Boston." Quinlan tensed slightly. Helena rarely spoke of her family back east, and when she did, there was always a hint of sadness. "What does she say?" "She wants to visit. She has never met the children, and she says it is time to mend fences." Helena looked uncertain. "I told you how my family felt about me leaving, how they thought I was throwing my life away coming out here. What do you want to do?" "I want her to see my life, Quinlan. I want her to see that I did not throw anything away. I found everything. I want her to meet my husband and my children and see that I am happy." "Does that sound petty?" "It sounds human." Quinlan took her hand. "Invite her. Let her come and see what you have built. Let her see that you made the right choice." So Helena's cousin Margaret came to visit that summer, a thin, proper woman from Boston who clearly expected to find her cousin living in primitive conditions in an uncivilized land. Instead, she found a thriving community, a beautiful family, and a cousin who glowed with happiness. Quinlan watched as Margaret's preconceptions crumbled over the 2 weeks of her visit. She attended church with them, visited the library, watched Quinlan work with horses, and spent long afternoons with the children. By the time she left, she was crying and hugging Helena tightly. "I was wrong," Margaret admitted. "I thought you were running away, but you were running toward something wonderful. I am sorry I did not support you." "It is all right," Helena assured her. "I understand now that not everyone is meant for this life. But I was, and I am so glad I had the courage to come here." After Margaret left, Helena seemed lighter, like she had needed that validation even though she had not realized it. That night, as they lay in bed together, she curled against Quinlan's chest. "I used to wonder sometimes if I had made the right choice," she admitted quietly. "Coming out here, leaving everything I knew, but I do not wonder anymore. This is exactly where I am supposed to be. With a stubborn cowboy and 3 wild children and a territory that is still figuring out how to be civilized. Exactly that." She kissed his chest. "I would not change a single thing." The years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and challenges. The children grew, each developing their own personalities and dreams. Thomas indeed inherited his namesake uncle's love of horses and became Quinlan's partner in the training business. Rose became a teacher like her mother, eventually taking over Helena's old position at the school. And James, the baby who had been so difficult, grew into a gentle, quiet boy who loved books and eventually went to college to become a doctor. Quinlan and Helena grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They added on to their house as needed, creating a home that was always open to family and friends. The table that had once held 2 plates for a lonely cowboy and a stranded schoolteacher now regularly hosted dinners for a dozen people or more. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party that seemed to include half of Alamosa. As Quinlan stood with his wife surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and friends, he thought about how different his life could have been. If Helena's horse had not thrown a shoe, if she had not seen his lamp, if he had not answered the door that night. But she had and he had, and everything had changed. "What are you thinking about?" Helena asked, reading his expression as she always could. "How grateful I am," he said simply. "For you, for this life, for every single moment." "Me too," she whispered. "Every single moment." As the party continued around them, Quinlan pulled his wife close and held her. This woman who had saved him from his loneliness and shown him that life was meant to be shared. They had built something beautiful together, starting with 2 plates on a table in a small cabin, and growing into a life full of love and family and purpose. The lonely cowboy who had eaten dinner alone every night was gone, replaced by a man who knew what it meant to be truly blessed. And it had all begun with a simple act of kindness, a woman setting 2 plates on a table, and showing him that he did not have to be alone anymore. Years later, when Quinlan was an old man sitting on his porch with his wife of 40 years beside him, surrounded by children and grandchildren, someone asked him what the secret to a happy life was. He thought for a long moment, then smiled. "Find someone who sees you when you are lost," he said, squeezing Helena's hand. "Someone who sets 2 plates when you have only been setting 1. Someone who reminds you that life is better when it is shared. Everything else will follow." Helena leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat together in comfortable silence. 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built a life more beautiful than either had dreamed possible. The table inside held many plates. Now children and grandchildren gathered for Sunday dinner. But Quinlan would always remember that first night when there were only 2, and how those 2 plates had changed everything. Their love story had started with loneliness and loss, but it had grown into something extraordinary, a testament to the power of human connection, and the courage it takes to open your heart after it has been broken. Quinlan Wright had been a lonely cowboy who ate dinner alone every night, until Helena Garrett set 2 plates on his table and showed him what it meant to be loved, and he felt less alone. He felt whole. He felt blessed beyond measure. That was the true happy ending, not just that they found each other, but that they built a life together that honored both their past sorrows and their present joys. A life full of love and laughter and the beautiful chaos of family. A life where no one ate alone, where the table was always set for whoever needed a place to belong. As the sun set on another day, Quinlan looked at his wife, his Helena, his heart, and knew that every lonely night before her had been worth it, because it had led him to this moment, to this life, to this love that would last forever.